Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tribal Council podcast, where on this podcast, Survivor represents our life, and when it's gone, so are we. Today, we will be ranking the 13th placers of the Survivor New Era, and this is a very exciting episode, because this is the first episode where we will be talking about merge boots. 5 of the merge boots will be covered in this episode, 3 will be covered in the next episode, and then when we get to the 11th placers, we will talk about Nate as the sole merge boot to come in 11th place in the New Era. But for now, let's just get right into it and talk about these 13th placers, starting with Rome Cooney. And do you want to get us started on why Rome is ranked last?
I can kick this off by saying one of the most notable things of Rome's game, down to advantages. Other notable part about Rome's game, misplayed both set advantages. His best allegiance was Genevieve, who carried his entire social game. Strategically, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how good attempting to blackball/bully people into voting your way is. Typically not very good once you get past like season 2, maybe, of Survivor history. With few exceptions. I mean, a couple people pull it off and are typically regarded as some of the best players ever because of how they do it and how they manage to do such. Rome does not attempt to do it in a very successful way, or a way that I think could be repeated in a successful manner, and overall just really doesn't find himself likable among the cast. So I think I can sum it up pretty well by saying Rome wasn't built in a day, but he sure fell in one.
Yeah, just like Sam said when he voted for Rome. Some other things to note about Rome. He might be one of the worst puzzle makers in Survivor history. That fire puzzle was absolutely embarrassing. Just all in all, terrible social game. Not great strategic game. He does survive 2 tribals, but I don't really even give him much credit for that, considering I think it has more to do with Genevieve kind of helping him out. And then when it comes to the merge, he's just unanimously voted out without any real issue. Nobody else is really brought up. I actually don't remember entirely if it's unanimous. I think maybe like Andy gets a couple stray votes or whatever, but it was very obvious that it was Rome going home. So, other thing that I wanted to mention was, this doesn't affect his rankings at all, but outside the season, he did leak the boot order for season 47, so I just don't respect him for that. We're going to move on to our 8th place from Survivor 48. We have Charity Nelms. Charity is a player who probably would have gone home first on her tribe if Siva had ever gone to a tribal council. We see her attempt to target Kyle, which just does not work out for her at all. We see, even at the swap, she's likely the first to go, as David just completely throws her under the bus. And then at the merge, she is the first person to go. So she's on 3 different tribes, and on all 3 tribes, she's most likely going to be the first person to go. That's truly, I think, the mark of a not very good player. She wasn't well liked by her tribe. She wasn't really all that well trusted by anyone other than Mitch. And I don't think she's particularly aware of her situation at any point either, so.
And before you get too far off topic, I want to add to that point by saying, after that, when she fails to target out Kyle, who are the 2 people she tries to target out next? Eva was never going to work either, and Say, you're a little late to that bus, sweetheart. I really think that she was not aware at all of the headspace that other players around her were in. And that's a super crucial part of the game of Survivor, is you have to be on the ball about knowing who's with who's trying to target who, and trying to see where other people are thinking. She was so far behind that she was never going to catch up.
Yeah. As for positives with Charity's game, she doesn't go unanimously. It's not even all that close to being unanimous, and she at least does have her closest ally vote with her at the merge vote, as opposed to Rome, who is voted for by Genevieve. So that's really what's keeping her above Rome, but aside from that, I don't really think there's anything positive to say about her game. So We move on. And at number 7, we have from Survivor 42, Daniel Strunk.
Daniel's game, unfortunately, looks super solid for most of an episode. And then really, as soon as he gets to Tribal Council, we really see why his game falls apart pretty quickly. He does not have the backbone to try and pull a strategic move when a tie vote comes up, and immediately loses his number one ally, or I guess one of his number one allies, in a tie vote tiebreaker. Could have tried to play something off, could have gone, rocks, I'll go for it, and then just flipped his vote, trying to maybe, as a result of his move not working. He has no backbone, no spine there, completely folds like a piece of paper, and ultimately just becomes untrustworthy, because if he's willing to throw one of his allies under the bus that quickly to avoid his own name being on the chop block, it's typically pretty hard to back that up and say, yep, I'm going to go to bat for that person down the line.
Yeah. We're introduced to Daniel. One of the first things we learn about him was that he campaigned for the Jeb Bush campaign, which, an interesting choice in allies. And then he kind of chooses to align himself with Chanel, another interesting choice in allies. Chanel, also not very trustworthy. It kind of makes sense at the end of the day that Daniel's not really willing to go to bat for her, considering she doesn't exactly own up to her own contributions to that alliance and the decisions that they made, but it's still just not a good look. It's still just not something that you want to do publicly. Throw your closest ally under the bus at Tribal Council and then immediately fold and just let go of another one of your allies in Jenny. I will say he gets a little bit unlucky that 2 of his allies lose their votes. But really, at the end of the day, the way he plays that situation out is just terrible, just atrocious. And then he also loses Mike's idol clue or something. I don't think he loses Mike's idol. That doesn't make sense to me unless I'm remembering incorrectly. But he definitely loses something in relation to Mike's idol, and that's just embarrassing. Dislocates his shoulder. I don't hold that too much against him. And then the fact that he's kind of targeted because, he can go spearfishing, but he can't compete in these swimming challenges is a little bit silly if you really think about it. Spearfishing and competing in a challenge where you have to swim as fast as you can just aren't even remotely the same things, but I do think that's to some extent attributed to his poor social game and the fact that people were looking for reasons to kind of hate on him and want to target him. So, at the end of the day, he's just not a good player, and that's all there really is to say. So,
to quickly jump back in on it, the idol thing, he realized that he dropped it and denied that he thought he'd been given it by Mike. And then they had to go find it along the path.
Yeah, it was a weird situation, all in all.
Yeah.
So, at number 6, we have from Survivor 46, Morriah Gaynor. I think that this sort of represents a new tier where these next few players aren't nearly as terrible as the first 3 that we talked about. Morriah, she does survive a tribal, mind you. She is on the outs. Her and Jem believe that they have Charlie and Maria. They think that they're going to vote out Ben. But at the end of the day, Charlie and Maria choose to side with Ben and Tim, and they vote out Jem. So she is on the outs, but at least she doesn't go home. Mind you, she probably does go home if Siga goes to another tribal council, and when it comes to the merge, Siga's pretty ready and willing to give Morriah up, so that's not a great look for her. I will say, I do think she goes home partially due to Tim's poor play, because he kind of pisses off the 6 when he's like, oh no, I'm not willing to vote out a Siga, and that sort of tips off Q to be like, okay, we need to vote out a Siga. But really, Morriah just doesn't do anything to save herself until the last second at Tribal Council, where she tries to throw her original tribe under the bus and be like, look guys, I'm not I'm not loyal to Sega. You can use me. It's just too little too late. And at the end of the day, she goes home without ever really having any agency in the game whatsoever. So
Yeah, honestly, the other thing that I would say with that is she had some very funny moments, which was very notable for the viewing pleasure, not so much to her game. Challenge-wise, did not contribute much, notably had 0 vertical, couldn't jump to save her life, and that was very funny to watch. Honestly, note for future Survivor players, learn how to jump a foot high.
yeah, I thought the scene of her tribe teaching her how to jump was really funny. Just all these people teaching a grown woman how to jump. That's the type of quality television that I watch Survivor for. Another notable thing about Morriah that doesn't really have anything to do with her game was the fact that she was on Wipeout, and I just really, given the fact that she can't jump, I really wish that I could find the episode of Wipeout that she was on, because I want to see how exactly she went about tackling those big red balls. And that was a regrettable sentence to come out of my mouth just now.
That was awesome.
I think we move on to our number 5 pick from Survivor 43. We have Elie Scott.
Yeah, Elie actually does have some really notable pluses, and for being this far down the list, for some of you this may be controversial, but she did have some staying power. She did actually get through a voting round with some semblance of potential majority blossoming, had some ability to potentially shake up the game a little bit, and unfortunately over time that started to slip. Sammy, Owen, Gabler started to kind of align themselves more than her and Janine had realized. Even though her and Janine had an idol, when they found themselves at the merge, she got alligablered. And honestly, I think that's something really cool for the purpose of the video, that we can talk about the one real cool move that Gabler did, because when we get to Gabler, that's not going to be nearly as interesting of a conversation. But unfortunately for Elie, she just had a lack of social awareness at a very key time, and unfortunately she just kind of didn't really reassure her tribe mates that she needed to be kept. And unfortunately, by the time that she caught wind of the move, it was a little too late to pull the trigger to kind of flip things onto someone else. She did make a fairly solid read on who she tried to flip it on once she got to that point, but it was unfortunately well too late.
Yeah, well, you know, I think her big mistake was just made in the very first episode. And I kind of never really fully understood why she voted out Morriah, because if she had kept Morriah and maybe voted out Gabler, like he was kind of serving on a silver platter, then those 3 girls could have really ran the Baka tribe, and also she wouldn't have made that enemy in Gabler down the line. Her pre-marriage is just really bad. The way that she tries to, like, convince Gabler that his idol is expired when it isn't is just such a I don't know, like, it's very condescending, right? Like, she thinks that Gabler is stupid. She thinks that he is so unbelievably stupid, and that's how she plays her game, is under that assumption. And it just doesn't work out for her, because Gabler, you know, might not be a great winner, but he's not stupid. He's not a dumbass. He's a man with, you know, some brain cells knocking around up there. He knew that his idol was still good. I do think the scene where she's like, oh, so I guess your idol's expired, hey? Like, that's crazy. Like, we could use it as a fake idol. And he's just like, no, I want to keep it for my daughter. I just thought that was fucking hilarious. And, you know, Gabler eventually coming out on top and throwing out Ellie's name to throw out Ellie's name and send her home. It's great television, but it doesn't make for a great game for Elie. The only reason she's as high as she is because she does get through one tribal where she actually is in the driver's seat and is in the majority, but that's really all you can say for Elie, I think. Moving on to number 4, we have J. Maya. Really the only person here who I don't think makes a single notable ally the entire time that she plays. She thinks that she's in with, like, I think maybe Dee and Julie and I don't know who else, Austin. I really don't know who Jay thinks her allies are, but she does seem to think that she's in some sort of majority. And it's just not the case. We kind of see that her and Sifu are on the bottom. She likely would have been the second person voted out of Reba had they gone to, well, any tribals. They do after the swap, and it is a majority Reba tribe, but Sifu ends up being the target, so that kind of tells us, I think, that between Jay and Sifu likely would have been the first target from Reba, but we also know that Jay would have been the next to go after him. The only thing that I can give Jay credit for is the fact that she would have been in on the Sifu vote and then would have gone home, as opposed to Morriah, who was on the outs. And the reason she's over Elie is because when she does go home at the merge, it isn't due to her own poor social gameplay as much as it is Caleb playing a shot in the dark. The shot in the dark hitting, it's a 1 in 6 chance. And then because of Jay's poor social gameplay, she ends up being the backup target. But she's not the initial target, unlike Elie, which is really the reason she ends up here at 4.
Yeah, and to kind of add on to that as well, it is also not necessarily just poor social connections, it's also just the least connections. It's the fact that she doesn't branch out, and maybe if she has a bunch of loose connections that can help save her, but there's a lack of connections, period. So it just, I think, goes to kind of show that, especially when her game plan coming in was kind of, alright, let's branch out, let's be everyone's friend, let's be popular amongst the group, and she really failed to capitalize on that idea, which ultimately was, kind of a good highlight to how poor her social game was at times, is that she just didn't do what she set out to do in the first place, and that was connect with people. So it was a really important part of the game that she kind of missed. However, she had a pretty solid all-around strategic aspect. It looked like at parts that, there was some potential maybe some places. It just, things did not line up after Caleb went out, and she did not have enough connections to survive any votes with an idle play, an advantage play, shot in the dark. So, yeah, she got caught in the crossfire because of, I would say, pretty poor social gameplay.
For sure. And, arguably if Sean hadn't quit and Sifu was voted out, maybe things could have been different. Maybe a Bello could have ended up as the target at that tribal council after Caleb shot in the dark play. That's the only thing that I can really say for Jay. Aside from that, I feel like she deserves to be here at number 4. But for number 3, we have somebody who is kind of funny being as high as she is. She's just kind of a strange player in the grand scheme of Survivor. It was really hard to place her on this list. But from Survivor 41, we have Genie Chen. And Connor, do you want to kind of get us started on explaining how Genie ended up here at number 3?
Yeah, so with Genie, we discussed her being all over the place. We potentially discussed her being slightly lower, slightly higher on the list, and ultimately settled on top 3 for a couple of reasons. A lot of the players lower on this list, I would say ultimately all of them in my opinion, found a way to make themselves targetable at least 1, if not 2 of their first tribals they attended. With Rome somewhat being an exception, he was targeted, but wasn't going to be targeted enough that it mattered. But Genie finds herself through not just 1, not just 2, but 3 full tribals without being a sincere, genuine consensus target that people latch onto because of her own fault, right? She finds herself in a situation where she's on a 3-person disaster tribe that never really gets its footing, and ultimately she goes out because there's just a better pair there. 2 people that ultimately want to work with each other more than they do with Genie. And I think that's really where Genie's games fall short, is she just couldn't make the true 1-2 punch and ultimately latch on to a partnership. But she does have allies throughout the game that clearly want to have her around and just are hoping that Survivor gods throw them a bone and they can win the right challenge to get themselves to the next stage, potentially to a merge situation where ultimately Genie could have gone a lot farther if that's the case, I think.
Yeah. Well, she does attach herself to Brad, and, kind of a weird person to attach herself to at the end of the day. I think, at the Sarah vote, she throws a very random vote at Ricard. She seems to really have something against Ricard, I'm not sure. Then she ends up losing Brad, and then she is kind of a target at the JD vote, but at the end of the day, JD is just not trusted. JD makes a lot of massive blunders. And then we get to this final three situation where we have Genie, Ricard, and Shan, and Shan has to decide between Genie and Ricard. And it's portrayed as, Ricard is the strategist who can, elevate Shan's game by, helping her come up with strategies and being a strong player alongside her. And then Genie's the loyalist who is going to be loyal to Shan to the bitter end. And at the end of the day, Shan chooses the strategist. Genie goes home, but I do think that there's a world where Shan considers keeping Genie. And in that world, I do think Genie goes relatively far as a, number for the Shan army, and then when Shan is inevitably blindsided, someone who just isn't viewed as a threat. But at the same time, going far as somebody who isn't viewed as a threat isn't the best way to go far. So, ultimately, while I do think that Genie is not a good player by any means, I don't think she ever really forms a real ally, aside from Brad, who she loses pretty easily. I don't think that she really stays due to her own merit so much as her just not making as big of mistakes as the other people on her tribe. There's something to be said about the fact that she survives 3 tribal councils more than any other person on this list. And the fact that she kind of almost survives a 4th maybe has to count for something, but I don't know. Genie is such a weird player to try to rank. But coming up, we do have maybe an even weirder player to try to rank. We ended up ranking him at number 2, but we have Matthew Grinstead-Mayle from Survivor 44. Matthew, he does quit, technically, and usually that's not a great sign. However, he quits due to medical reasons. He is sort of recommended by the medical team to pull himself from the game, not once, but twice before he actually does. He plays through 11 days with, well, technically, I think he plays through 9 days with a pretty bad injury that causes him a lot of pain. I don't really think you can hold it too much against him that he quits. I do think that you can hold it against him that he gets injured in the first place, because it wasn't a freak accident. He was climbing up on a big boulder that just very clearly was not safe, and he pretty predictably falls and hurts his arm really bad. So you kind of have to knock him for just being so reckless in the first place, but the reason he ends up so high is just how phenomenally he plays the game for the 11 days that he plays it. He plays his shot in the dark in that first episode in a genius way to sort of hide his allegiances in a tribal that was so chaotic that no one would necessarily blamed him for playing a shot in the dark. He finds an idol, he hides a fake idol that is found by Jamie, he forms strong bonds with multiple tribe mates. He kind of, I feel like, is running that Ratu tribe while he's on it, and then unfortunately he just can't go any further with his injury, and it really is unfortunate, because I think he would have been one of the better players going into the merge had he been able to sort of heal up and not just consistently get worse with his arm over the course of the 11 days he was out there.
Yeah, and what also made it really difficult to rank Matthew is some aspects of the fact that, again, he shows a ton of promise, but that reckless, carefree sense that he seems to play with ultimately doesn't favor his health. And at the end of the day, Survivor, in the most basic, bland description you can provide, you have to survive. And being too carefree with how you take care of yourself, doing things that are just thoughtless or too reckless, isn't good for your game. There's sometimes you have to take a chance, take a risk. Climbing up a rock for fun, or to do something that's just a little, explorative, isn't good, necessarily. There's just no real upside to that decision, and it ultimately does affect his outcome. Like, he gets somewhat medically pulled from the game, which, I was super hesitant to have him this high, because again, technically, quit is the right label for it, but it's a medically advised quit, and he's reluctant, and he really does try to fight it. Again, as you mentioned, he's injured for 9 days, in the game for 11. So he plays over a third of the game with this injury. So it's not like he just gets injured on day 2, throws in the towel. He does fight through it for quite a while and is respectably in the game for longer than he probably should have been with this injury. So although it was tough to rank him, we did consider that and kind of, to an extent, overlook the fact that he does technically quit.
Yeah, because, really, it's the fact that for the 9 days that he's out there with that injury, he just shows so much promise and plays so well as well. Whereas you look at certain other players who quit, like Hannah and Sean, they don't play particularly good games before they quit. When you look at a player like Bruce, who is medically evacuated, he doesn't, really get to play the game at all. So we have nothing to go off of for how well he would have played, except for his future game the next season, where he plays pretty terribly. With Matthew, we see that he probably would have been a phenomenal player going into the merge, a considerable contender to actually win if he doesn't injure his arm. And that it's so hard not to put him up here in the top 2 spots, when I sincerely think he would have been one of the biggest contenders to win the game had he not fallen off of a boulder and injured his arm on day 2. And he does fight through that for so long, and he does fight through that despite medical recommending that he pull himself from the game. It's just, he goes as far as he can, and he ultimately has to pull himself from the game. It almost is a medical evacuation, because I know that he would not have pulled himself from the game unless he truly felt like he had no other choice. So originally I did have him significantly lower on this list, but as we talked about it more and kind of talked about his game a little bit more, I talked myself into putting him a bit higher, and Connor sort of followed suit as we realized that he is a phenomenal player, aside from the fact that he stupidly chose to climb up that boulder and get himself killed. And B, this is a placement that has a lot of really terrible players, to be honest. So that also plays a role in his high ranking here. But at the end of the day, he doesn't play well enough to earn the number 1 spot. And the player who does, is also a kind of weird one to rank for completely different reasons. But we have, from Survivor 49, Jason Treul.
To start off with Jason, one of the most notable parts of his game is we see it quite literally be part of his fault and why he goes home, is that he was just so dedicated to Hina. He was Hina to and through, to the end, and it's almost the reason he goes home a tribal earlier. But at the end of the day, he goes home ultimately because the Survivor gods said he was going to draw the wrong buff. And I think that's unfortunately just something that has to be mentioned. He gets swap screwed, right? Happens to players, circumstances unavoidable. But when he does end up in a situation, there was 2, technically 3 people that aren't from the majority tribe, that don't have the numbers, that are wearing the wrong buff on day 1 when they end up in the swap tribe. And he outlasts one of them. He makes it through. One of the other 3 people, or I guess other 2 people of the 3, pretty much gets, converted into red. And we essentially see a 2-horse race where he's the last horse standing. So I think it's a weirdly terrible strategy that somehow proves effective, that gets him through the round. But at the same time, he gets pretty much as far as you can expect him to get after the swap happens. And ultimately, he does have a potentially decent position on Hina that's kind of hard to determine. His potentially bad position. The dynamics of that tribe are just TBD, really. There's just a lot of unknowns that we'll always have with that, because players before the game, after the game, might have talked about certain things differently than, what we saw on TV. So it's hard to know for sure. It looked like he might have been on the bottom, but ultimately that's kind of something that we don't get to see because, again, Jason's game gets cut shorter than you'd expect it to.
Yeah, well, I mean, the swap screw is pretty obvious. There's really not much he could have done. It's not like he could have convinced anyone on Elie to turn against their tribe, I don't think. I don't think he could have convinced them to take out Soph in that situation, and I just don't see it. He outlasts Matthew, and I think that's great. I think you have to give him a lot of credit for that. And as for his position on Original Hina Tribe, Hina is just one of the most nebulous tribes in the new era of Survivor, where we know Steven was running that tribe based on what we were shown. We know that MC was supposedly his closest ally, but even that we don't learn until after the swap or some bullshit. We know that Sophie S was a target. We know that maybe Matthew was a target. We don't really ever see Jason be a target, but we don't really ever see him in a position of power either. And it's just really hard to say how things would have gone for him on Hina based on what we were shown on the show. Now, we might have a little bit more information from post-season interviews and stuff, but we try not to let that impact these rankings too much. So, and even then, the information is not really conclusive. So it's just, Jason's such a weird person to rank, but what it really comes down to is the fact that I think pretty clearly he's not the first person to go from Hina if they go to a tribal council. He's not the first person to go from his swap tribe, which is impressive considering it was between him and one other person, and there just really wasn't anything that could have been done about it. And then, if he just not been on such a bad swap tribe that lost two immunities in a row, and had he made the merge, he would have been a loyal ally for, Steven, and likely would have gone far for it. So I don't know. It's really hard to rank Jason. He does end up number one for us, but it just kind of feels weird because of all the unknowns when it comes to Jason's game and all the question marks when it comes to Hina in general. So, that being said, anything you want to say to wrap up Jason?
No, ultimately I think he, again, is just going to be one of the hardest ones to rank just because situationally it's difficult to know what truly would have happened with this tribe because, again, it was in almost an opposite sense to some other players, like, for example, Genie's tribe was such a disaster. Jason's tribe was one of the most historically successful tribes of the new era, and ultimately didn't really have control of the end game, which meant that they weren't shown as the, editing darlings. So we just didn't get to see enough Hina content to truly dictate enough information to determine what likely would have happened to Jason's game had the swap not happened the way it did.
Yeah, if only Jason was on a tribe with the Riz God, then maybe we would have been allowed to know how well he was positioned on his tribe. But
yeah, that kind of unfortunately tells us the story. It's just wrong tribe, didn't give us enough information.
No, but with the information that we did have, we determined that he would go here at number one, even if it's kind of a questionable ranking overall. This was probably the most difficult placement so far to rank. I mean, we have some truly strange players. We have Rome, Daniel, Genie, Matthew, Jason, just some of the weirdest people to try to rank in this way. So if you disagree with our rankings, honestly, I don't blame you. I don't feel great about anything when it comes to these rankings. This is the best that I think I could feel, but at the end of the day, we put a lot of thought into this, and I'm still just kind of like, yeah, I guess Jason's number one, I guess Matthew's number two, I guess Genie's number three. It's just such a weird placement. But at the end of the day, we did our best, and I'm happy with the rankings that we came up with. So That being said, we're going to be covering the 12th placers next, where we'll talk about 3 more merge boots in Josh, Sydney, and Lydia. But until then, we hope you all enjoyed this video, and the pod has spoken.